Good evening, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to Hilaal Live. My name is Faraz Patel. I would like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us. I would also like to thank my colleague Luqman Shadrack for taking you through that first part of the show. Now, the Palestinian Authority could return to power in the Gaza Strip only if a comprehensive political solution is found to the current war in Gaza. This is according to PA President Mahmoud Abbas. Hamas is considered a terrorist group by the US and the European Union and is a rival of Abbas's Fatah party. Now, Hamas took over Gaza from the PA in 2007 after being blocked from exercising real power despite winning a parliamentary election the previous year. Joining us now to discuss whether this is actually a reality, I'd like to bring in Middle Eastern political analyst Na'eem Jeenah. Na'eem, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and jazakallah for joining us.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Na'eem, before we talk about, obviously, the topic that we had brought you here for, I just want to get your initial reactions to Minister Naledi Pandor's comments or statement that was made yesterday in Parliament calling for the ICC to bring war crime charges against Benjamin Netanyahu.
Right. I think it's the absolutely correct position to take. What we're seeing unfolding over the past more than 4 weeks are most definitely war crimes. Some might argue crimes against humanity, and there are some who are arguing, of course, like the former head of the New York office of the Human Rights Commissioner, that it constitutes genocide. So certainly an ICC prosecution, I think, is necessary not only for Netanyahu, but for many of the others in his cabinet and the heads of the army.
Na'eem, the recalling of diplomats from Israel, I mean, that sent a strong statement, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I mean, and to understand how strong the statement was, we just have to look at the response from both the Israelis and the Zionist lobby in South Africa, who are hopping mad, partly confused, but certainly very, very unhappy about what has happened. Again, I think it was the correct thing to do. South Africa, of course, wasn't the first. It's not leading the way on this issue. There's been many other countries that have withdrawn their ambassadors. I think 2 countries now that have closed their embassies. We haven't closed our embassy. We couldn't withdraw our ambassador because we don't have one. We haven't had an ambassador there since 2018 when our ambassador was recalled. But withdrawing all diplomatic staff does send a strong statement, and it's clear that the South African government takes the issue of what's happening in Gaza extremely seriously.
Na'eem, okay, let's talk about the topic which you brought here, of course. Palestinian Authority, now he was with Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. I don't know whether it was to massage the ego of the US, but when looking at it, I mean, it's going to be difficult, isn't it? Because the people of Gaza, from looking this from obviously the outside, have put their trust in Hamas as a political organization because they were elected there close to 16 years ago.
Well, 18 years ago.
18.
They were not elected in Gaza. They were elected in all of the occupied territories, in Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. That's where the election was, and they won that election. In Gaza, they had a higher percentage than in the others, but they won the election overall. In Gaza, I mean, so one thing is that, you know, this talk of the day after Hamas is just ridiculous talk, because the day after, if you want a day after Hamas, it means that Israel has to literally murder hundreds of thousands of people. You know, if the figures that we have are to be taken as truth, the number of fighters in the resistance in Gaza, Hamas, the biggest, but also Islamic Jihad, PFLP, etc., is between 30 and 40,000. That's between 30 and 40,000 families that they belong to. And that's just the military wings of these organizations. If you have to take the political wings as well, you're literally looking at hundreds of thousands of organizations. If you want to eliminate Hamas, hundreds of thousands of people. If you want to eliminate Hamas, you have to kill all of those people. Otherwise, how do you eliminate it? And that is just not going to happen. It's not possible to do it. And so this talk about what will happen the day after Hamas is ridiculous talk. And so I think that Mahmoud Abbas was, for once, somewhat smart when he said, yes, we're willing to consider that as part of a comprehensive peace solution, knowing that firstly that the Israelis are not interested in even a partial peace solution, and secondly, knowing that if there was any kind of real talks towards a solution, that Hamas would have to be part of those talks. You can't exclude them. So that's the reality. It means really nothing what he said.
You talk about it being smart. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu was looking at this and saying, of course, if he doesn't read between the lines, he'd love this, won't he? Because then he doesn't have to deal with what they, of course, the Israeli government is terming the irritation that is presented to them in terms of Gaza, and that is none other than Hamas.
Well, yes and no. I mean, he would perhaps he would like that because it would mean that he would be able to continue the occupation of Gaza while having a sheriff of his handling the situation. But the reality is that Abbas and the PA are no longer able to control the West Bank where they are based. There's no possibility that they're going to be able to also control Gaza. The only way that Gaza can be quote unquote controlled is if the Israeli occupation forces locate themselves there for the long term. And that would mean making it explicit to the world that they are occupying Gaza, and that conveys on them under international law a whole range of responsibilities. As they already do have, but even more responsibilities and very expensive responsibilities. So I really do think that Israel is in a situation where they're not sure what to do next. If they pull out now, they haven't achieved any goal. And Hamas is as strong as it ever was, as well as the other resistance groups. If they stay for the long term, then they are saddled with the territory with direct occupation. If they try and put the PA from Ramallah there, that's not going to work either. There really is no way out of this except, as I said, a genocide, murdering hundreds of thousands of Palestinians.
Na'eem, one final question before I let you go. Ehud Olmert, in an article on Politico, it's very rare that you see one Israeli prime minister sort of like taking a bit of a dab at another. And he said that, and I quote, Benjamin Netanyahu is in a bit of trouble because he does not know how to control the situation in Gaza. You've mentioned it. I mean, that was another strong statement, wasn't it? Because, I mean, they always sing each other's praises, these prime ministers, even if it's not in Israel, it's in other countries, but especially in Israel, where they protect each other and wrap each other with cotton wool. This was quite a strong statement, wasn't it?
Well, not in the current context. Netanyahu is under huge amounts of pressure from all sides. I mean, even within his party, within his own coalition, he's under pressure for not having done enough, for not having known that this was going to happen, not having done what needed to be done when it did happen, not knowing what to do next, and making a mess of everything in the year leading up to the 7th of October. And then, of course, trying to undermine the judiciary and all of that. So I think that there's a kind of fed up factor in Israeli society about Netanyahu, and Olmert is just echoing that.
Na'eem, always a pleasure having you. Jazakallah so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That's Na'eem Jeenah, a Middle Eastern political analyst there. Just breaking down, of course, those comments that were made by Mahmoud Abbas when he was with the US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. After the break, the Al-Qassam Brigade, who are they, and of course, their role in the liberation of Palestine. I'll be speaking to Zakir Mayet. He is a geopolitical and military analyst, just to get an idea of who they are as the military wing of Hamas. Do stay tuned.